Thank you for coming. I'm going to do a brief introduction for Mark. You probably all already know this, but he is the author of the New York Times bestseller, This Town, the #1 bestseller. He also wrote Citizens of the Green Room and The New Imperialists. He is chief national correspondent for the New York Times Magazine. He is winner of a National Magazine Award for his story on Politico's Mike Allen and the changing media culture of D.C. And before joining the magazine, he was the national political reporter in the New York Times D.C. bureau. He's covered the political campaigns in 2008, 2012, and the Obama presidency. But if you ask me, actually, the most impressive line on his bio, or at least it should be, is friend of Tom Brady. This is a man.
Best friend of
Best
Tom
friend,
Brady.
I'm sorry. This is a man, when he emails Tom Brady returns those emails.
He does.
As we find out in the book.
Sometimes he initiates it.
Whoa.
At least he did once.
Whoa.
To tell me he didn't know his own address. Long story. Anyway.
So there's some email correspondence in Mark's book, Big Game, the NFL in Dangerous Times, which we're going to talk about. And I think one of the things that struck me about the book was just how much access you got, because anyone who has covered the NFL, and I have over a couple of decades, knows that it can be a very tight-lipped league. They are very concerned about optics, and they really don't like anyone to give interviews, let's say, unchaperoned or at all. So how did you wrangle access to Brady, access to Kraft, access to Dallas Cowboys owner Jerry Jones?
You know, it's a really good question. I sort of, first of all, thank you all for coming. I mean, if we can get more than 30 at the end of the day on a Sunday after like a long weekend of great authors, we're happy. So thank you for, one, being here, and two, numbering more than 30. And look, there are more people trickling over.
Come.
I'm not a sports writer. I love sports. I have always cared deeply about sports, way too deeply about sports. And people have always asked me, you're in journalism, why don't you just become a sports writer because you like sports so much? And I said, as soon as I do that, I'll stop liking sports. And it's always been kind of a sideshow for me. And I assumed when I needed a break from politics, which I think many of us did after the last election, and I was going to take a couple of years to sort of look into the NFL, because I wasn't a sports writer, I would have no luck whatsoever getting to any of these people. I mean, Shira and sports writers who have been working, these beats for many, many years have, I thought, a familiarity, a rapport with a lot of the athletes, a lot of the owners, a lot of the people at the leagues. And I was sort of very pleasantly surprised. I mean, I think a lot of people that I talked to and that I approached liked the idea that I wasn't a sports writer. They liked the idea that I covered politics for a living, and they all think they know something, so they could ask me, well, what's Donald like? What's Hillary like? Because they're all, a lot of these people, especially the owners, have cavorted and fundraised for these folks and have sort of traveled in a lot of the same circles. But I mean, the short answer is I have no idea. I asked a lot. I had a pretty high hit rate, higher than I thought. It helped to get Brady first, and that was sort of part of a 2 or 3, 4 year project in which I would just have this sort of annual interaction with Don Yee, who is his agent, every year. And Don is kind of a different kind of NFL animal. He loves politics. He's written a few politically oriented pieces for the Washington Post. So we kind of connected on a few different levels. And then I did a story for the Times Magazine on Roger Goodell about a year later. And that had the kind of imprimatur of the league, and that helped quite a bit. I mean, I don't think they were happy with what I wrote, either in the Times Magazine or in the book about Roger Goodell, but it did allow me to get in the door. And it also made me realize that a lot of people at the league don't necessarily have a lot of use for a lot of the people, including owners at the various clubs, and a lot of the people at the various clubs don't have a lot of use for the league. There are a lot of different kind of wedges that you could throw yourself into and kind of try to exploit the tension there. But again, the short answer is I was lucky. I have no idea.
All right, we'll go with luck, but I'm
Satisfying,
not entirely believing.
Oh, my charm too. Don't forget.
That's what I.
Charm. Yeah.
So we'll get to Goodell in a little bit, but I want to stick with Brady and also something else you said, which was when you started writing this book and reporting for it, you worried that you might not like sports after it. And I'm
Yeah.
curious with Brady in particular, because you're a Pats fan, getting to meet him, going to his house. How did it change your perception of who he is, how he goes about his business? And I'd actually ask also the same question about Robert Kraft because you spent some time interviewing him one on one as well. So those figures
Yeah.
that you'd sort of, I'm guessing, admired from afar as
Yeah,
a
I never
fan.
admired Robert Kraft that much. I mean,
Okay.
again, I'm grateful as a Pats fan that like they didn't move to St. Louis and he helped, and I certainly can appreciate his his stewardship of the Patriots. I mean, he's presided over a great team to root for. I mean, sometimes a little difficult especially if you don't live around New England, as I don't. But no, I mean, it's a great question. I mean, I think most of the people I got to know around the league, I didn't come out loving. Just because I realize there's a sense of real insulation, entitlement, in many cases, kind of arrogance, especially around a lot of the team owners. Tom Brady was a wonderfully refreshing surprise. I really liked getting to know him, not just because he's Tom fucking Brady, and sorry for swearing, and I have to say, I mean, I say this in the book. I mean, I've interviewed presidents and CEOs and all kinds of people, celebrities over the years. I mean, going into Tom Brady's New York apartment for the first time and meeting him was the first time I've really been nervous in a while. I mean, this was like a moment where I was well into my career, and I'm like, wow, this is weird. And here's this guy who actually is Tom Brady, and he's very normal. And like his parents were people I got to know pretty well in the course of reporting this. Love them, still keep in touch with them. They're tremendously good and decent and down to earth people. And Tom is completely unlike me, although we both I lived in the Bay Area. He lives in New England now. We both went to the University of Michigan, so we basically had the exact same life. We both married beautiful, Brazilian supermodels. But no, I mean, like it was after the surrealness of it kind of left me. It was kind of, he's a pretty easy guy to talk to. I mean, with the understanding that I will never be him, he will never be me, and we will never connect on any kind of meaningful level other than, we're two pretty curious human beings who I think enjoyed kind of getting to know what each other's lives were like, especially his, obviously, because I'm the guy writing the book. But he had a lot of questions about politics, about Washington, about how journalism works, how writing works. And one of the reasons I think he let me in to begin with, this is what Don Yee said, is that he likes sort of studying people who are in other professions and sort of seeing what success looks like, what research looks like, what sort of he likes watching people sort of go about their jobs in other realms, and I appreciated that, and I thought it was pretty genuine.
All right. So since you didn't admire Kraft from afar, let's stick a little bit with Kraft here. I mean, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't address recent news and what happened in Florida. After
Yeah.
having spoken with him and gotten to know him at least, I mean,
Yeah.
he did gift you some organic eggs
Twice.
twice. This is a big deal with Kraft.
He keeps chickens on his property in Brookline. I think he was one of two households that is licensed to keep chickens. I don't know if there might be a bigger number or a smaller number. Anyway, they hatch organic kosher eggs. Anyway, that's a whole other. That'll be the next book. It's a fascinating topic. Anyway, sorry.
What did you make of it when the news trickled out and sort of
About okay, so the prostitution.
yeah, and given your familiarity with him and basically
Yeah.
how out of touch these owners can be with reality.
Yeah, I wasn't surprised at all. I mean, what I'm surprised by, I would be surprised if he was the only owner that had situations like this. I mean, when I remember hearing from other owners after this news broke, and their biggest surprise was that he got caught, that he didn't create a situation where he was, shall we say, more discreet. Some kind of escort thing. I don't know. I mean, but look, a lot of them, again, live in a billionaire world. They're almost entirely men. Many of them are old. Many of them have had multiple marriages, and I'm sure many of them have had, all kinds of sort of hush money arrangements and sort of special arrangements involving uh, human intimacy, and this is an example of that. I think I was sort of amazed again. I mean, and I'd finished reporting this book, and there's all this. I wouldn't say pressure, but my publisher said, "Hey, you want to write a special chapter on this for the paperback?" And my answer, after about maybe 1 second of thought, was, "No, I don't actually." But look, it's a fairly common thing. It wouldn't be surprised. It wouldn't surprise me at all, and I don't have any inside information on this, but wouldn't surprise me if he's had other experiences like that. It wasn't a one-off or a two-off, I guess. So, look, Robert is a pretty human person in his own way. He's very vulnerable. Lost his wife about 8 years ago. Very familiar in a way. I think he's not as good a politician as he thinks he is. He doesn't come off as smooth and as winning as maybe Tom Brady does or other public figures do. And I don't know. I mean, he has a lot of enemies too. I mean, he has a lot of enemies around the league. He has a lot of enemies around Boston. He has you don't get to become a billionaire without having some rough edges, and obviously some of it is jealousy, but I don't think it's all there.
So one of the things I liked about your book, and when you were talking about the owners, was early on they're at the owners meetings in Florida, and they're at a luxury resort in Boca Raton, and they're all complaining about the accommodations because it's not the Breakers
yeah.
in Palm Beach. And again, this notion of being detached from reality, entitled, nothing is ever good enough, a bunch of basically older white male billionaires running around. And was there an owner that you liked? Was there a relatable owner, someone who had some relationship with reality?
Yeah, I mean, there were some relatable. I mean, many of them were relatable in their own ways. I mean, I think part of your job as a journalist is obviously finding things that you can relate to someone on, whether it's a goofy little story or pretending that you can drink however many bottles of Johnny Walker Blue on the Dallas Cowboys bus, even though I came out looking like an idiot for it.
Oh, wait, we got it. I was going to say.
Later. We'll say later.
Or you could go into that now. That's an amazing story.
Steve Tisch, who's a co-owner of the New York Giants, is a great guy. I really like him. He's a billionaire. I remember him. So he was one of the owners who was complaining that we were at the Boca Raton Resort, which is a 4 or 5 star resort. I mean,
Waldorf owned, right?
Well, it's beautiful. I mean, but no, everyone was bitching that we weren't at the Breakers in Palm Beach. And Steve, well, there was one owner. I won't identify him. Who said that, I don't want to be quoted here because I don't want to come off like a spoiled rich guy. But Steve is someone who has a great sense of humor for himself. He realizes fully the absurdity of his situation. And he's the one guy I really sort of keep in touch with on a fairly regular basis. And he probably wouldn't want me to say that publicly, but I just did.
So he's your other best friend.
I like Steve. Yeah, Steve is my he's my billionaire best friend. Tom's not a billionaire just yet, although he signed a new contract today. $23 million a year, which is under market.
Yeah, but still a nice 42nd birthday gift.
He's giving back to the community. Yeah.
One of the scenes that you talk about in your book, an owner scene, is there was a meeting after the player protests, kneeling on the field. The owners call this meeting. It's at 345 Park Avenue, which is NFL headquarters in New York City. And they bring in the players. They bring in owners, executives are there, and I'm trying to remember, is it Pagula, the Bills owner, who says, they're trying to figure out what do they do about these player protests, and Pagula says, well, we've got to find our Charlton Heston.
Yeah. Oh, the Charlton Heston guy. Yeah, I think it was Terry Pagula, correct.
And saying, and preferably it's a black
African American Charlton Heston
exactly.
for a spokesperson.
Yeah, for a spokesperson. Their whole idea is that the issue with the player protests is about controlling the narrative. Right. And I'm just wondering, when you hear owners say that, an owner say that, and it certainly got some support in that meeting. It seemed.
It was bizarre.
Yeah, I'm saying, is it surreal? Is it bizarre to see, this is who is controlling the NFL?
The world, the country's most successful sport, one of the most, successful entertainment juggernauts we have in this country. So the backstory here is that, like, within a couple of weeks or within a couple of days of President Trump weighing in and saying that those who are not standing for the national anthem. So you just get, I'd love to see one owner fire the players and say, get that son of a bitch off the field. It caused a huge to-do around the league. And Roger Goodell convened a meeting of players, a bunch of players, selected group of players and owners to 345 Park Avenue. And Goodell, at the beginning of the meeting, announced that, it's very important that the contents of the meeting stay private, that they maintain a level of trust. And my colleague Ken Belson at the New York Times and I received a audio recording of the meeting within a few hours of this, which I deeply appreciated. It might have been a violation of whatever trust was agreed to, but we got to hear what these owners were saying. And yeah, Terry Pegula, the co-owner of the Buffalo Bills, said that the NFL's problem at this moment was that they needed a better spokesperson, and he reached into the to the history of the I guess the NRA, right? Charlton Heston was their spokesperson, and the NFL needed their own Charlton Heston, preferably African American. And he basically concluded his little talk by saying, we need a Charlton Heston. Charlton Heston, who died about 8 years ago or so, by the way. But and then there was like Steve Ross, the owner of the Miami Dolphins, who said that I think what we should do is we should have a march on Washington of players and owners together, because the March on Washington during the 60s was one of the most inspiring moments of my youth. And, I just didn't see a million people marching for civil rights in the 60s as particularly analogous to a bunch of NFL owners and maybe a few players marching on Washington in 2018. Anyway, the idea never got off the ground, so we'll never see that history being made right now. But, yeah, it was quite a thing to listen to. He really did get a sense of how smaller than life a lot of these people who control our local teams really are.
Yeah, and you bring up Goodell wanting this meeting to remain private, and of course it didn't, as you said. Within hours, you've got the audio tape. And I'm curious, how much power does Goodell actually have? How much sway does he actually have? Because I think one of the things...
Great question, yeah.
One of the things that sort of keeps him in office is the fact that he has promised, what is it? The NFL will achieve $25 billion in gross revenue by 2027. And he's well compensated. We make around $40 million a year as NFL commissioner. So what keeps him employed, and how much sway does he actually have?
32 very, very needy billionaires. I mean, seriously, if you put Roger Goodell's commissionership to a vote of fans, he might get, 10% of the vote? Probably would get less around here, right? Yeah. He'd probably get less in New Orleans. He'd get less in Oakland. He'd get less in San Diego. I mean, you can go city by city. I mean, he's really, really alienated a lot of people. If you ask the players, probably maybe 10, 20%, right?
You think that high?
Players, I don't know. I mean, I think, who knows? I mean, if you ask the owners, of which there are 32, he'd probably get a fair number of them. And although privately, a lot of them think he's completely in over his head, but he does the single most important thing to keep these owners happy, which is that he makes tons of money for them. He's a very good negotiator of TV deals. He has incredible leverage as essentially the CEO of the most potent, of the sport that I think last year had 49 of the top 50 top-rated shows in America. It was all. Then there were a few of those were college games, like the national championship game. But I mean, this is how much people love football. And there's one of the players I think said that I mean, this is. He basically operates like a drug dealer, and football is like America's crack because people are just going to watch it, right? And the other way of looking at this, and Eric Winston, who was an offensive lineman, played for 4 or 5 teams, most recently Cincinnati, head of the Players Association, said that everyone says that Roger is great at making money, but even the worst bartender at spring break is going to make a lot of money. So. That's some faint praise. But no, look, unlike politics, this is not a group of people that have to run for re-election. I think it might be different if they did. But he's accountable to 32, pretty needy people.
And yet you relay a contract negotiation that was quite intense, where Jerry Jones, the Dallas Cowboys owner, was not happy with the $40 million he was getting a year. I think it was actually $44.2 million in 2012. Right. And I think Arthur Blank, the owner of the Atlanta Falcons, was not happy either. So some of the membership, as the 32 owners are called, have been raising objections. So Is he there for the foreseeable future? Is his
Oh yeah,
you think even
yeah,
and you think his position, by the way, is strengthened by owners getting in trouble, like not only Kraft but Jerry Richardson and sexual harassment, his
yeah.
sexual harassment lawsuit.
I
I
mean,
mean,
he is. Oh, they're singing. Wow. I'll sing after. We can sing together. We can do a duet. Well, I mean,
they
first of
really
all,
don't want to hear that.
no, I won't sing. His position is strengthened because he's got a 5-year deal. Okay, so I mean, that's just. I mean, he's going to get his 200 and whatever $1 million, no matter what. But yeah, I mean, he's very. And another thing he's very good at, by the way, is. And Roger Goodell's father was a senator from New York. His name was Charles Goodell. Was a congressman. He was appointed to the U.S. Senate from New York after Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated. And so Roger is a politician, and one of the things he does is he plays owners off each other very, very well. You mentioned his contract negotiation. Arthur Blank, actually, he was head of the compensation committee. He actually wanted Roger to have this money, and most of them just didn't want to deal with this. They just said, "All right, we're making money hand over fist. We don't care what he makes, just as long as it." They're mostly worried about what their own bottom line is. But um, I think Roger Goodell suspending Tom Brady a few years ago for nothing, and I'm not just saying that to pander to the New England audience. I mean, it was one of the biggest, stupidest sports scandals in history. I mean, it was a complete, farce. Bred him nothing but goodwill among the owners in the league, who love to see him stick it to the New England Patriots, who is not a well-loved or not a well-loved outfit around the league. Again, only partly because they win all the time, but partly because I think they're arrogant, and partly because I think people genuinely think they don't always play by the rules. But again, this is politically strong for Roger Goodell. All you really need to do is keep 32 people happy, and that's what he does.
So by commenting on how good a politician Roger Goodell is, I'm just curious. Aside from the commissioner of the owners, you mentioned that Robert Kraft is not as good a politician as
Right.
he thinks he is. Who are the top politicians? And you can apply some of your DC analysis to this. Who are the top politicians?
It's a great question. I mean, I think John Mara, the owner, the other owner of the New York Giants, Tish the Giants have 2 owners. Every other team has 1. They made a special case for them. Actually, the Green Bay Packers are shareholder owned. As there will always be someone pointing out to me, so I get it. They don't have an owner; they have shareholders. But John Mara and Clark Hunt of the Kansas City Chiefs are pretty good at both sort of talking to Roger on a fairly. I mean, they have good relations with a lot of the other owners. I mean, Robert Kraft. I mean, I don't think he's that good a politician as far as winning over a guy like me and maybe the public, but he's good in that he is head of some extremely important committees. I mean, the finance committee and the broadcast committee, which is where a lot of the revenue comes in. I mean, certainly broadcast is where 60% of the NFL's revenue comes in. And he talks to Goodell on a regular basis, and the team does well, and he's been around for a while, and he's always there. He is someone who is extremely active in the league. I mean, at least half of them are pretty absentee. I mean, they'll show up at owners' meetings, sometimes grudgingly, sometimes not at all. But he is, he's done quite well. I mean, I don't know if he's done well by the Patriots, but he's done well by himself. He's certainly positioned to influence the owner and so forth. Arthur Blank is another one. I like him a lot, owner of the Falcons. Not sure he likes me, but I like Arthur. So.
Staying with owners for a little bit more here, one thing that you said interested me, which was they're okay with Goodell because he keeps the money coming in truckloads, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
18-wheeler truckloads, really. Do they love the game or do they love the money?
They love having a toy like they do. They love being so important and in many cases very visible in their communities. First of all, I mean, from a business proposition, it's a great investment. I mean, all of them have just pretty much doubled their investments over the last 10, 20 years. But look, Robert Kraft, again, if he were just the successful CEO of a paper company in New England that, did business around the world, no one would know who he is. I mean, he likes being a public figure. He likes the fact that, people come up and thank him. I mean, a lot of it is just pure dead-on ego. They consider themselves sportsmen. They consider themselves philanthropists. Instead of just being a bunch of ruthless rich guys, they get to sort of adorn themselves in this higher virtue of being these great, I don't know, athletes. Essentially, I mean, a lot of them are frustrated athletes. A lot of them are frustrated, fill in the blanks. I don't know. I mean, it gives them an ego component and a public adulation component that they wouldn't otherwise have if they were just anonymous people spending their money. And some of them, want to be just anonymous people spending their money or not spending their money.
You had a wonderful description in the book, if I hope I'm recalling this correctly, where you called the owners pillars of the community, yet despised by the community.
In many cases, yeah. I mean, it's funny. I actually did a count of owners of various teams who basically can't come out in public because they're too want to embarrass themselves. I mean, I live in Washington D.C., home of the Washington Redskins, whose owner Dan Snyder is about as close a point of bipartisan agreement as we have in Washington, as far as the loathing of him and of how he has run that team, and that extends to a lot of the other owners around the league. And there's some pretty colorful descriptions of him that, because of all the kids in the audience, I won't repeat. Actually, I don't think there's a single kid in the audience, but I'm not going to repeat it anyway. It's all in the book. But no, I mean, the owner of the 49ers, I mean, Jed York, the owner. I mean, there are, first of all, a lot of owners just take their teams and move them. And they just become pariahs. In many cases, their hometowns. And they don't care. I mean, a lot of them just don't interact with the public very much. And that's sort of it's their cross to bear, and, it's the lives they've chosen.
So let's turn to an area we know well, media, and also then how the league is covered.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it comes across in the book that there's so much that is, I want to say wrong might be, with this league and
Right.
its perception of itself and how it goes about its business. We can talk about concussions here. We can talk about players committing acts of sexual abuse and domestic violence, and the way the league has handled that.
Mm-hmm.
And yet the media is often not as critical as it should be of the league. If you ever go to one of Roger Goodell's press conferences at the Super Bowl, which we've both been to,
Oh gosh.
it's pretty much a staged dog and pony show, and you're not allowed to ask Roger Goodell the tough questions. But I'm
Right.
wondering, in your view, how complicit, in a way, is the media that covers the NFL in not taking the league to task more for its shortcomings and allowing the owners and Goodell to control the narrative?
I mean, that's another great question, and it's also analogous to something. Actually, we were talking about this yesterday when we were in the politics panel with Jim Acosta. I mean, there's a lot of pack journalism in certainly politics, and by pack journalism, I mean reporters sort of hanging out together, sort of hanging out in a world where everyone sort of lives and breathes and plays by the same rules, and you come to these sets of assumptions of what's important and what is not. Now, again, I had an advantage as an outsider. I mean, I'm not covering the NFL right now. I'm not sure I would have written the book differently if I were, but there's a really good chance if I were worried about alienating A, B, or C and needed A, B, or C for the purposes of doing my job going forward, I might pull some real punches. I might not look in some places. I might not phrase things a certain way. And that's true when you're on the White House beat, and it's true when you're on the Patriots beat, right? You need, to some degree, someone to not feed you things. That's too solicitous. But there is a kind of Stockholm syndrome in which you are at the mercy of the community you inhabit every day. And I remember saying, actually, when my book came out, when the hardcover came out about a year ago, Dan Shaughnessy of the Globe, I was talking to him, and he wrote a column about it. And I said, I basically made this point. I said, if I go in there throwing bombs every day and like shouting at Bill Belichick and like, just sort of taking all kinds of shots at Robert Kraft and player X, Y, and Z, my job's going to be very uncomfortable. My workplace is going to be very uncomfortable. It might not necessarily make my job. I might not necessarily be doing my job better because of it. I'm not sure. I mean, maybe my work would be more colorful, but I mean, again, I think every reporter, especially in a beat situation, especially in a situation where one entity is controlling the information, whether it's the NFL, whether it's the New England Patriots, whether it's the New York Jets, whether it's the White House or whatever, you have to sort of, again, make a constant cost benefit about how you're going to get your information, what you can say, what you should say, what the cost is, what the reward is. And again, that's why it was a lot easier to be an outsider, and a lot different than the politics books I've written, or mostly, the last one, This Town, which was really hard because I threw some real sharp elbows at some people that I have to work with. I mean, not necessarily in the same newsroom, but certainly in the Washington media, certainly in Washington, including some people who are around here this weekend, which can make for some awkward cocktail party stuff. But who cares?
So I'm going to ask a couple of crystal ball, look into the
Sure.
future questions. But as I'm doing that, I would encourage people. There's at least one microphone where we're getting to the audience question portion. So I'm going to ask two questions. You can pick which one you want or both.
Okay.
One question you raise in the book is how will Tom Brady fill the void once his career is over? So I want to know if you had any thoughts on that. And then another crystal ball question, while we're getting a lot of people lined up, is what happens to the future of the NFL? I mean, does the juggernaut continue, or does it go the way of boxing?
Two great questions. I mean, the void. The question of the void. What do people who live, breathe, and eat football or baseball, whatever it is they're doing, how they survive after it's all over, after the camaraderie of the locker room is over, after the thrill of competition is over, after the regimen of their training is over. And people struggle. And I asked Brady this once, and he said, it's going to definitely create a void. His parents are worried about him. So I guess his way of avoiding it is just to play for as long as possible. And, maybe he'll make it to 50 or 60 or 70, whatever. As far as the NFL, I'm not one of these people who thinks it's going to die in 20 years, possibly 40 years. And
is it a death? You were talking with your colleague Joe Drape. Is it a
Yeah.
player dying on the field or getting paralyzed in the Super Bowl, or is it death by 1,000 paper cuts?
I think it's death.
Lots of little things.
Yeah, I think it's death by a number of things. I think part of it is that far fewer people are playing youth football now. I think the kind of labor pool is going to shrink precipitously over the next. It already has, but it's going to continue to. It's going to be very hard for high schools and youth programs to get insurance. There'll be all kinds of legal stuff. I mean, there's going to be a lot of all kinds of nuisances related to health and safety as more becomes known, and frankly, as the toll becomes greater. So, I would probably put that timeline closer to 40 years than 20 years. So, but that's just a fairly wild guess. So,
Go for it.
A follow-on question, same topic. Looking at concussions, where do you see the trend line of that leading to the demise of the NFL?
well, I think the trend line is you can read the research in any number of ways. I mean, they, I guess, keep track of how many concussions there are every year, and some years it goes up and some years it goes down. I mean, the fact is, the more research that comes out on this, it's almost always damning, right? I mean, whenever they study a deceased player's brain, and you obviously cannot test for, or, not yet, this could change very soon, as far as measuring a brain's, the damage that's been done to a football player's brain. It's never good. So I think that awareness will filter down. I mean, especially when you have trends involving global entertainment. I mean, the growth of the NBA, the growth of soccer. And I'm not one of these people who says that, well, soccer is the new football, because we've been saying that for, about 40 years now. But, I mean, the truth is that football does not have a big growth trajectory the way that the NBA does, the way that soccer does, the way that global games do. I mean, football is an American game. I mean, maybe they can expand into Mexico, maybe into Great Britain, but other than that, there's a pretty hard wall for them. So, I don't know.
Trying in China.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see it anytime soon. But no, but I think awareness is probably not the best friend to the NFL, because it almost always is pretty ominous. So, yep.
Thank you. It's been great. What's next for you?
What's next for me? Great question. I have a day job. I'm covering the campaign. I am in the middle of a bunch of stories now. Actually, right now I'm trying to stay on vacation without getting harassed by my bosses for at least another week. We unfortunately have to leave here tomorrow, but I mean, right now I'm really enjoying just having one job and not having a book to write. But I'll figure something out in the next year or so.
Thank you. What does a good owner do to make a team good, and what does a bad owner do to make the team bad?
That's a great question. I think a good owner is someone who surrounds him or herself. One, it'd be good if they were a her. It'd be good to get some women owners, right?
There's only one, right? Is there
They're
only one?
applauding all the way over there.
There's only one at the time. One at the moment. Right?
There are a lot of the actually there are some women owners. Part of them are like inheritances, like widows or widowers or whatever. Like widows, and then there's often some lawsuits involving daughter, whatever. It's none. You don't see like Oprah Winfrey bidding to like buy the Carolina Panthers after Jerry Richardson gets drummed out of the league for sexual harassment. Be nice if it did happen. Be actually also nice if like some minority owners came forward. I mean, right now every single of the 32 owners is white except for Shad Khan, who was born in Pakistan. He owns the Jacksonville Jaguars, but it's ridiculous. I mean, it's 72% of the workforce is African American, and you don't have a single African American owner. It's embarrassing. But I think, look, I think it's probably best for owners not to meddle in football. It's always good when they spend money up to the salary cap. It's good when they're good people and they don't think it's about them. And that's one of the most annoying things about the owners. Like, we have to care too much about them. I don't want to care about like the rich guy who owns the team. I mean, the NFL is like the one sport where more than others, you always have to see the cutaway shot to the owner's box to see, we can't like fully appreciate the Roman gladiators' heroic efforts until we see the owners of the horse owners in the box of the Kentucky Derby. I'm totally mixing metaphors here. Gladiators, but it's just like
The
the only
emperor.
sport where it's the emperor. We have to why do we have to see the plutocrats sitting in their boxes reacting either by jumping into each other's arms or like looking despondent? Although it's kind of fun to watch them despondent.
So for many NFL players, especially players from communities of color and low-income communities, it's like one of their only ways of like success.
Yep.
But it comes at a cost of injury, concussion, CTE, death. Is
Yeah.
that when you were speaking to players? Is that still worth the trade-off for most of them? And is that the trade-off for younger players still too?
It's interesting. I mean, it's like many other sectors of society where the most hazardous ways out of economic hardship can be extremely harmful to the body, frankly, harmful to one's psychology. I mean, it's a traumatic way to sort of come out. And I don't think it's right, but I think one of the interesting things is I talked to a lot of football players, many of them Hall of Famers, who paid an incredible physical price for the years they played in the league, years they spent playing football, and they almost always at the end will say, I would do it again. And again, maybe that's kind of like the heroic answer to give at the end of this, although they don't all say that. But I mean, it obviously varies from person to person, but I think, if you are living in a difficult economic environment growing up and you're relying on football or, for that matter, basketball or whatever to sort of make it out, support your family, pay back, people who helped you sort of come out of your economics rate. I mean, your hit rate's pretty low. I mean, it's just sort of the fact. I mean, there's a very, very, very low chance, even though there's like over 1,000 NFL players, that anyone in a youth football program, even the best player in the program, is going to ever put on a uniform in the NFL. So, I mean, look, I think it really does depend, but I mean, I think it's like anything. I mean, I think it does sort of the risk is often commensurate with the economic straits you're coming out of. So,
I think we got one
Yeah.
more, right?
all right,
Hi.
perfect.
I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about. I get all the points that have been stipulated about Goodell, but at some point he will no longer be the commissioner. And I continue to be struck by the difference between him and someone like an Adam Silver. I understand the league ownership structures and different and everything like that.
Yeah.
But just as a contrast, how do you think at that point the NFL will go for someone who's more forward thinking? Who are the people on that short list? I'd love to hear some commentary
Yeah.
on that next era and what that might bring.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Adam Silver as commissioner of the NBA. I mean, he has been approached by the league, by the NFL. I don't know seriously, but there is certainly a lot of the owners of the NFL have paid attention to how Adam Silver has run the NBA as far as how out front he's been on on how outspoken he is, on how he's a far more compelling face of the league than Roger Goodell is. I mean, Roger Goodell is a robot. He also is a bad politician. I mean, he's not particularly fun to watch. When you mentioned the dog and pony show of Roger Goodell's press conference at the Super Bowl, which I think is very unfair to dogs and ponies. I mean, Adam Silver. I mean, he's pretty outspoken. I mean, he talked about mental health and players and how miserable so many of them are and how social media is ruining the moods of so many of their star players. This might not be the perfect example, but it's sort of somewhat timely in that Adam Silver, even before sports gambling was made legal by the Supreme Court, he said that we're going to try to figure out a way to sort of not regulate this, but sort of make it something that the NBA can work with in a way that makes it safe for the integrity of our game. Obviously, the side part of this is helping us maybe profit from it a little bit. I talked to, again, a number of NFL owners who are quite compelled by Silver. And look, I think a guy like him would be a fascinating choice for the league. Who else? You hear things like, I mean, Barack Obama was asked by Bill Simmons, and I think it was The Ringer or something, might have been on ESPN or something, what sports league he'd most like to run, and his answer was, "Have you seen what Roger Goodell is making?" So I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there without comment.
I think you alluded.
Well,
Can we just have one?
We have people waiting.
I can get you privately.
Thank you. I'm really sorry.
Sorry.
It's a private question.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll have one
All right.
private question, but thank you,
yeah.
everyone. And time is up. Thank you, Mark. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks for coming, everyone.
Yes, thank you all for coming.